Hello and welcome to episode 193 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is April 23rd, and together with Robert and Goran, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone. So a few weeks ago, we had talked about the Azure Center for SAP Solutions and how it helps you from the Azure Portal to create and operate SAP systems. We talked about integrating other Azure solutions like the Azure Monitor or the Health Check with your SAP system. One cool thing that is available under the hood are APIs, which allow you to fetch all this information from your SAP systems. And this can actually be quite powerful. So Trond Stroemme took these APIs and built a really neat Copilot scenario around it. Using the Azure AI Studio, you can now build a simple chat bot that allows you to interact with the Azure Center for SAP Solutions. Trond, welcome back to our show.
Thank you. Great to be here, Holger.
Perfect. So before we take a look at the actual scenario, maybe for those of you, you have been on the show before, but maybe for those of you who haven't seen you before, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself. What do you do? What do you do at Microsoft?
Absolutely. So I'm a cloud solutions architect for SAP on Azure. I've been with Microsoft for 5 years, more or less.
Cool.
Now. And the last time I was here, we talked about sizing SAP workloads on Azure. So I work out of the Swiss region for Azure, and I'm happy to be at Microsoft and really excited to be on this podcast. And as you said, try to talk about something which for me is fairly new, which is creating chatbots with SAP.
Really cool. And I mean, you've shown us before, obviously, what you have done there. And I thought the simplicity, but also the power behind this scenario is what really, really impressed me. And I mean, ACSS is something that we had talked about several times before, but actually, I never really realized that there are these APIs available. And obviously, with these APIs, there are a lot of things that you can do. And I think you had this fantastic idea to take these APIs and bring them into an AI context, basically.
Yeah, actually, the idea was not mine. I have to mention that it was mentioned by one of my colleagues, Sanjeev Kumar, who's also a CSA for SAP on Azure in Switzerland. We talked about that briefly in an internal conversation we had 1 week, and he sort of inspired me to try this out in real life using prompt flow. I know that he's done another example using autogen, but my solution is based on prompt flow because it's an easy way to spin up a conversational AI, a conversational chatbot, basically.
So actually, since we are pre-recording this meeting, I'm not 100% sure, but we will have Sanjeev also on the podcast. We have him already scheduled, but now I don't know if he comes before we release this episode or after. But so anyways, look out for Sanjeev as well. I think he has also created a really nice scenario. Good. But Trond, maybe let's start with the APIs. As said, there's the Azure Center for SAP Solution, which you can use to register and monitor, operate an SAP system on Azure. And as you said, there are APIs available. So maybe we can start with this and take a look at these APIs.
Yep. So allow me to share my screen briefly. So you probably know Azure Center for SAP Solutions, right? It's a solution which has been out there for at least a couple of years now. And it basically consists of two, let's say, main features. You can use it to deploy SAP systems on Azure, and you can also use it to register existing SAP systems on Azure. So you get something called a virtual instance, which is basically your top-level citizen on Azure for an SAP system, right? Mm-hmm. And here I am in the API manager, and you can see that there are, for SAP virtual instances, there is a bunch of different APIs. You can use these APIs to programmatically create an SAP virtual instance. Mm-hmm. You can delete, you can get information. One interesting one is list by subscription. And this is the one I've been using in my solution, because normally normally as a customer for SAP on Azure, you will have a number of subscriptions, right? And you will probably have one subscription for your prod systems, one for your dev systems, and so on and so forth. So if you really want to create a solution which, let's say, interacts with all of these SAP systems, and that's what I have done, you will probably want to iterate on your subscriptions and then make one call for each subscription and get a list of these SAP systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you can look at how this works. There are code samples here on this side. This is the HTTP request. You can see how it would look like if you were to implement this in Python. And
nice, yeah.
This sort of explains how I have done things. This is really easy, actually. You just import a couple of packages up here, and then you basically create a function which then instantiates a client, which is the workloads management client, and it has several types of calls. Here, it's a sample call with one specific subscription ID, and the response then, as you can see, it's a list of objects basically, and it looks something like this. So for each of your virtual instances, you get the ID, you get the name. So here you have an SAP system called X00. You can see the location of it. That's the region where it's deployed. You can see when it was created, not when the SAP system was created, but when this was instantiated by ACSS, right? And you can see, and this is the interesting part, you can see the properties. You can see what kind of environment it is.
Nice, yeah.
Whether it's the prod system or dev system or whatnot. You can see the underlying product. So S/4HANA, good. Again, the region here, and for each of the components, you have central server, you have a bit further down, you have application servers, and then you have database servers. So for each of the underlying components, you can get quite a bit of information here. So nice. Again, this is a sample payload, and of course, I mean, there are different API calls. You could, for instance, go into more details. If you want more information about the application servers, you can then do specific calls for each of these servers and get everything from VM size to kernel patch to whatnot. So I mean, the solution can really branch out in a lot of different directions.
And especially since, so this is basically, this could be the starting point where you ask, look, what SAP systems are available, but then you get more information. You could drill down even further. You could potentially call other APIs to get additional information on the virtual machine size or
absolutely
other information that is available from there.
Yep. You could, in theory, you could use any API which is under the Azure Resource Manager umbrella. And here on the left side, you see, of course, a lot of different API types or classes that you can relate to. So my solution is now using two specific APIs: one to get the list of systems per subscription, and then a second call to get more information about the application servers.
Okay. Nice. Okay. So this is basically the starting point. Now, if I have Postman, or as you said, if I want to develop a Python script or something, or maybe Node.js, I think there were a few other examples up there. Then I could now just use this to query the available virtual instances in my Azure subscription.
Yep, absolutely. And as you can see, here are the code snippets for a range of different languages: JavaScript, .NET, Python, Java, whatnot. Or you can call it from Postman, as you said, by just doing the HTTP call.
Okay, so what have you done now with this API?
Okay. So this brings us to the Azure ML Studio and the prompt flow mechanism that we have here. And prompt flow is basically an easy way to get started with creating ML or AI solutions. So a prompt flow is basically a series of steps that each link to each other, and then you can create prompt flows for different scenarios. What I have done here is create a chat-based prompt flow, which is basically the underlying fundamentals for creating a conversational AI solution, right? So we start with some inputs. If you look at the graph here on the right side, we start with some inputs, which is normally the question from the user, right? For instance, how many SAP systems do I have in my subscription? And that fires off a series of different steps. The first step is basically try to figure out what the user is asking about. And if we look at the code for that one, this is basically where you put in your prompt. You probably heard about prompt engineering and how to tell a conversational agent like ChatGPT what it should reply with regards to a specific question from a user. So I've given some examples here just to sort of try to engineer a prompt which the GPT model can, because the underlying model here is GPT, right? I'm using GPT-4 at the bottom of this. So this is the prompt trying to distill a request out of the question from the user. And then we have a step here which contains the actual Python code. And if we look at this Python code, it's more or less similar to the sample Python code we just looked at when we looked at the sample API, but with a little bit of magic around it, because what you also need, of course, is to access your ACSS instance. So basically your prompt flow chatbot needs to be able to connect to ACSS, right? And for that,
the whole authentication.
Yeah, exactly. So normally what you would do is you need to use a service principal. So I'm using here a service principal. I'm providing the client ID and secret for that service principal. I'm providing the tenant ID and also the subscription ID where I want to interact with my ACSS payloads. So based on that, I basically execute a call. There are two calls, as I mentioned. This is the first one. Here is where I get all of the virtual instances for my ACSS installation. And then I look at the response. I loop at the response because normally you will have more than one SAP system in here, right? And I extract some information. I don't extract everything because I've been trying to limit, let's say, the scope of this proof of concept or starting point. It's meant as a starting point, right? Customers can do anything with this. They can extract all the kinds of information they want. But what's interesting from my point of view here is the ID of each virtual instance, the location, environment, status, and health, resource group. And then I check the application servers. I get the VM size and image, the SKU. I get the number of application servers for each system. And then for each of these application servers, I try to make a second call here, which takes basically the object name, which is the application server name, and get some additional information about that. So what I'm getting here is basically the kernel version and kernel patch and some additional info on that. I do the same thing, almost the same thing for the DB. I get the VM size, image, SKU, instant count, and then I append everything into a list. So when this step is finished, we basically have a list of the various components in this specific SAP system. I process that in the next step, and by processing, I mean I basically try to serialize this and put it into an object, which can be used by the chat functionality. And I then feed that into the augmented chat for the chatbot itself. So at the end of this process, it means that every iteration of this conversation will basically feed this information back into the chat and let's say contribute to the context of the conversation.
So you have the history basically, which means you can ask a question, you can ask another question, and then with the third question, you can refer back to the answers from the initial questions or something.
Exactly. Like I'd just like to notice or to point out one nice feature of the prompt flow designer, which is the fact that when you build a prompt flow, you can actually test each of these steps interactively. This is a little bit like Jupyter Notebook for those who have been involved with development using that specific tool. So each of these steps can be executed separately, and as you can see here, this is the step which fires off the call to the APIs, and this is actual output from one of these calls that I made. So you can see the output here contains information about SAP System CHA4, which resides in resource group contours of 4. This is then the ACSS server size, if I'm not wrong. It's deployed on SUSE. And then you have some additional information for each of the application servers and so on and so forth. So this is the list of information which is extracted from ACSS.
Great. So you have these individual building blocks, and when you test, when you create this first prompt flow, you can test these individual blocks, which obviously makes developing and troubleshooting in the end much easier.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. So
cool.
At the end of that, I mean, this can be tested directly here from the builder itself. You can basically temporarily deploy this by selecting a runtime, and this will actually deploy this as a Docker container, if I'm not wrong. And then you can chat with your development directly in the builder itself. So you can test it out. You can basically do some trial and error, which obviously I've done. At the end of that process, however, the interesting thing is you can also then deploy this chatbot to an endpoint. And at the end of that process, you get, I can show you this on the left side. Okay, let's just leave the editor and look at the endpoints. So deploying this will basically allow you to deploy it. And when you deploy it, this is deployed as Docker containers, and you can select the size of your deployment, what kind of virtual machines it's going to be deployed on, the underlying architecture, and so on and so forth. And when all of that is done, you can do a comprehensive test of the solution here. So are you ready to interact with ACSS?
Yes, let's give it a try.
Let's try. So I can start by asking it how many SAP systems we have. Let's hope the latency is good enough to give us an answer without too much waiting time. Okay, there are 4 systems.
Oh, there are 4 systems. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's a clear and concise answer. It doesn't give us a lot of information, so let's try to add something additional.
Like what systems? Or
yeah.
What are the SIDs? Okay, yeah, the SAP IDs. That's actually pretty nice. So you asked the question, and then we go through all the steps that you just showed us in the prompt flow.
Yep.
So the first one is basically to get the idea what this is all about. Then in the next step, you call the ACSS API, you retrieve the relevant information, and then you feed the information back to the chatbot, and then it renders here like this list view here.
Exactly. And as I said, this is based on GPT-4. I think it runs with GPT 3.5 as well, but my deployment is using GPT-4. So it has all of the, let's say, conversational bells and whistles that you get with the GPT-4 model as well. So you don't need to predefine like we did in the old days when we built chatbots. We predefined entities and intents and all that. This is coming out of the box more or less. So, okay, so we have some more information, right? We can continue. No, let me.
What is the system? Oh, nice. With the largest
DB server. Let's see if it takes that one. I actually haven't tried that before, so this is going to be the first. Because when I say when I say largest, it might actually construe that as being the one with the largest number of CPUs or memory. Sometimes it's a little bit it wants to distinguish between the two. But okay, here we go. So SID CHA has the largest DB server according to its Azure Virtual Machine SKU. Yeah, exactly. It's very precise about that.
Okay.
And then it gives some additional information, which I didn't ask for. So the other systems use standard E16 DSV4, which is a smaller size. You see, the answer is quite comprehensive here. It gives the answer, but it also elaborates and relates to the other systems, and gives us additional information about that.
And it is interesting that it knows that the M64 is larger than the E16.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
But it does a sort of it states that according to its Azure Virtual Machine SKU. So I mean there are different ways of measuring the size of a VM. Okay, let's try something else because you might want some more technical details. are any systems deployed on SUSE? So now here we go into the operating system realm, right? I want to know if I have any systems on SUSE. I could have asked about Red Hat or whatnot, but let's check. Okay, here we go. So 2 systems are deployed on SUSE.
Oh, nice. Okay, interesting. So it has the knowledge from ACSS, all these properties. We have these 4 systems, but apparently 2 of them are, and it provided you also with the resource group as well information.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's ask about the 2 other systems. Okay, and it goes, the 2 other systems are deployed on the Red Hat operating system. Okay.
Nice.
So let me just have a little, because I mentioned I've been using 2 APIs, right? One is the general get SAP information from ACSS based on subscription. The other one is more details about the application servers. So let's try to ask something specific about the application servers. What are the kernel for the
app service for these 2?
So okay, now nice. I want to keep the focus on the 2 last servers. I don't care about the previous ones. I want to have this information for CH3 and AB1 specifically. Let's see if it takes that, because as I said at the beginning, the context is being continuously fed back into the chatbot, right? Okay, and here we go. It remembers now. Okay, the kernel patch levels of the app server to SUSE. Okay, so now it focuses on the SUSE systems, not the other 2 systems. So it's clear that for the chatbot,
those 2 meant the SUSE ones, not the Red Hat
SUSE ones, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Can you do, what if you ask, what about the Red Hat systems? Would it remember the context of the question, that we are still interested in the patch levels? Yeah. So I mean, and all of this obviously goes back to the system prompt that you have defined in the beginning, in the prompt flow, where you provided some examples, where you grounded the information basically. Yeah.
And okay, here we go. The kernel patch levels for the application servers for the other systems are not specified. Okay, fine.
Oh.
So at least it knows what I was talking about.
Yeah, right? Interesting.
It gave the CHA and CS6 system info, and when I asked about the other ones, it related that to the 2 previous systems where the information is not available. Okay, so good. Yeah, just to talk a little bit about the prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is a large and complex area, and I think there are quite a few thousand articles out there about how to create the ideal prompt for any kind of chatbot. I haven't experimented a lot, but I have given some examples. We can probably look at that if we go back to the prompt flow. So if we look at my chatbot and we start at the beginning where you have so this is my prompt engineering, basically. You're an AI assistant reading the transcript. I have a conversation between an AI and a human, blah, blah, blah. And then I want to see the list of SAP instances. How many SAP systems do I have? And so on and so forth. So there are some examples here, which I'm using. But again, what I have found is that you don't really need to be very advanced when it comes to prompt engineering for a chatbot like this. It's really good at taking the context, taking the information that you feed into it, and coming up with, as we saw, very elaborate and very logical answers to any of the questions you might want to ask it.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, very nice.
So I think that basically shows the capabilities of this product. And as I said, in a way, it's pretty rudimentary because it gives you a limited list of information. I think 10 different categories of information for each SAP system and a few additional bits and pieces for the app servers. But if you look at the total amount of code, this is really not a lot. This is just a couple of API calls, and then the majority of the work is really extracting information from the JSON payload that comes back. And that can be a little bit of a problem because the Python object which is returned is pretty complex as such. So it could take a little bit of trial and error to try to figure out how to translate that into readable information. But once you get that done, then there is basically no stopping you. And as I said, you can add then for any kind of scenario you might want to put into this chatbot, you can add API calls for all kinds of specific bits and pieces of information. So you could actually end up with a very comprehensive solution. And specifically, if you have a large SAP on Azure workload with lots of systems, numerous machines, even numerous subscriptions, this could be interesting if you want to rapidly traverse your total amount of workload. Let's say you want to just find out how many of my systems are running on Red Hat, how many are running on SUSE, what are the kernel patch levels for each of these servers, and so on and so forth. You could do really interesting kind of slicing and dicing of information with a solution, right?
I fully agree. I mean, even this small question that you asked, what's the largest DB size, was interesting. And I guess we could have asked a similar question. What system has the highest patch level or something like that, which would require a lot of or several calls to get the results. And here you just asked this chatbot basically, and it would return the answers to you. So I think this is really powerful, which obviously raises the question, how can I do this? How can I get started with these scenarios?
Okay, so what I did was obviously starting from scratch, and I was starting out because the prompt flow designer is, as I said, a very nice tool. You need to set up an AI service on Azure before you start using it, because basically you need a model, you need the deployment, and I mentioned mine is running on GPT-4, so I have a GPT-4 deployment which you tie into this specific model. But to create a flow, just to show you how that works, in the prompt flow designer, there are lots of sample flows you can start with if you want to create something on your own. And I was actually starting with one of these. I was starting with the chat with Wikipedia flow, because this is one sample flow which uses API calls to Wikipedia to extract information based on the questions you ask. So you can ask about anything, or at least anything which is let's say, embedded into a Wikipedia article. And then I elaborated it, replaced obviously the Wikipedia API calls with ACSS API calls, and simplified the flow and rationalized it a little bit, and did some prompt engineering. And the end result was basically what you just saw.
Really nice.
I also have crystallized this into a GitHub repository, obviously. So this is a repository.
So I don't need to go through the Wikipedia example and then extract and modify, but I can immediately get started with your chat with ACSS GitHub repo.
You can do that, and I think we're providing the link to this repository as well. So I've done some extensive testing over the past few days because I wanted to make sure that this is more or less foolproof. I really wanted to create something that people can use, let's say from scratch without having to do a lot of work. So the instructions here are, I think, pretty comprehensive. You have some prerequisites. You need, as I said, you need an Azure OpenAI instance. You need to deploy a model into it, and you need to use one of the GPT models for that deployment, which is fine. You need to have the service principal with reader rights on the subscription or the tenant where your ACSS instances are stored. And that's basically what you need in terms of prerequisites. Apart from that, you just basically clone my repository. You upload it into the prompt flow designer in Azure ML Studio. You change, obviously, the connection details, so the service principal, the tenant ID, subscription ID, and the Azure OpenAI connection and deployment details. And after that, you're basically good to go. I mean, there is no need to change the code or anything like that. It's just the secrets and the connection details. And after that, it should work.
But really cool. And I mean, this can be used as a foundation for anyone to build on top. So they can add additional API calls. They can add additional functionalities.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the prompt flow designer also has some other features which I haven't mentioned. You have for instance, you have the possibility of creating conditional branches in your prompt flow. So you could, for instance, have a conditional branch here somewhere, which sort of deduces whether you ask specific information about DB servers or app servers, and then branch out and get specific DB server related information, because there are specific API calls for that as well. And really you could try to deduce what the user is asking, and then have conditional steps which gets additional information, and I mean, yeah, the sky's the limits basically when it comes to this.
Really cool, and I think it's great that you have documented, that you have made all of this available, so it's very easy for everyone to get started. And I think if you start playing around with this, then you get inspired to maybe call other APIs that you have in your environment. Maybe
absolutely
enhance the scenario. Nice.
Yeah, and as you can see, there was a lot of APIs, not just for ACSS, but for anything running on Azure, right? So the one I just mentioned for app servers is basically a separate API. Oh, there is such a long list of APIs here, but yeah, you can do absolutely anything. And once you identify one little part of your SAP on Azure installment, let's say you are using Azure NetApp files, there are APIs for that as well, of course. So you can go into the resource manager reference, and you can see all of these cool APIs that you can use in order to extract information about any kind of components that your SAP system might consist of. So cool. Yeah, there's absolutely no limits to what you can implement with this solution.
Perfect. Well, Trond, thank you so much for this quick overview. And first of all, I mean, creating this scenario, I think this is really nice, and it shows nicely what you can do with just a simple API and combining this with GPT. And I think this will definitely inspire a lot of other customers to build similar scenarios on top using prompt flow. So thank you so much for this.
Thanks for having me here.
Good. With this, let's wrap it up. Thank you. So we had you before with a very different topic. Now we are covering AI. So Trond, next time, let's see what you'll
let's see what
you'll come up next time.
Great.
Perfect.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. See you. Bye-bye.